welcome to this explainer. Let's jump right in, because I want you to picture something with me. Put yourself in this exact scenario. It's an ordinary Sunday night, back in 1938. You're just chilling in your living room with your family, you flip on the radio for some evening entertainment, and suddenly, your regular broadcast gets completely derailed by a terrifying announcement. Something strange has landed in New Jersey. I mean, just think about hearing those exact words crackling through your radio speakers. And then comes another report, rapidly firing off new details. People are fleeing. Entire buildings are being destroyed. Some bizarre, unknown army is aggressively moving across the country. And you know what the absolute most terrifying part of this entire experience was? The voice on the radio delivering this news sounded completely 100% real. Because of this, thousands of Americans reportedly began to believe that the United States was under an active existential attack.
But here's the massive, world-tilting twist that makes this event so legendary. Are you ready? The invasion wasn't real. None of it. There were no aliens, no destroyed buildings, literally no army. So how exactly did a completely fictional radio program manage to create one of America's most famous mass panics?
Okay, let's dive into this. Section 1. A tense era.
To really understand why people were so primed to panic, we have to look at the historical context. America was living through an incredibly tense era. World War II was rapidly approaching, and everyday citizens were picking up newspapers that were just filled with stories about international conflict and looming threats. Crucially, the radio had become the single most powerful, trusted source of information in American homes. It was basically a psychological tinderbox just waiting for a spark.
And you know, that spark came in the form of a broadcast on CBS radio. The listeners tuning in that night weren't actually hearing the news at all. They were simply hearing a dramatic adaptation of H.G. Wells' famous science fiction novel, The War of the Worlds. It was entirely meant to be entertainment. But what happened next completely transcended entertainment and became history.
Section 2. The breaking news illusion.
And this brilliantly illustrates the exact narrative tools the producers used to hack the audience's trust. The broadcast began like an ordinary music show, right? But then, Step 1, they suddenly interrupted the music with a serious news bulletin. Step 2, they brought in fake reporters claiming to be live on the scene. And Step 3, they layered in fake experts and referenced real locations. They bypassed logic entirely by making a fictional story sound exactly like a real-time event.
These fake reporters started describing a localized threat at a place called Grover's Mill, New Jersey, but the details escalated horribly and rapidly. They weren't just describing a meteor anymore, they started describing enormous machines emerging from the object. Then, deadly weapons. And finally, creatures from another world that were definitely not human. As the reports grew more dramatic, they claimed these Martians were actually moving toward New York. They presented it exactly like breaking news, and for some listeners, this incredibly detailed, escalating horror sounded completely real.
Which brings us to Section 3. Did America really panic? Because the story gets wonderfully complicated here.
So fictional monsters are marching on New York on the radio, but what was actually happening in American living rooms? Well, based on initial reports, the panic was very real. Because the broadcast had sounded so convincing, people reportedly rushed outside in pure fear. Terrified citizens called police stations, and families literally prepared to flee. This terrifying story spread from neighbor to neighbor way faster than anyone could even verify it.
But wait, there is a massive gap between the enduring myth and the historical reality. For decades, this event was described as if millions of Americans undeniably believed aliens had invaded. But that narrative was largely driven by newspaper sensationalism just trying to sell copies. Modern historians have seriously questioned how widespread the panic actually was. The historical reality is that the broadcast actually included disclaimers identifying it as a dramatization. And honestly, a lot of listeners clearly understood it was just fiction.
So you might be wondering, if there were disclaimers, why were some people still genuinely terrified? Let's look at Section 4, the tech gap.
It comes down to this. In 1938, there was no internet. You couldn't just open a laptop and check a news website to see if the world was ending.
There were no smartphones. You couldn't quickly text a friend in New Jersey to ask if they were seeing giant alien machines. There was no social media to check trending topics. And ultimately, there was absolutely no instant fact-checking. Think about how isolating that is. If the radio, which remember, was a relatively new and highly powerful, trusted source of news, told you something terrifying was happening, you had very few ways to immediately verify it. You were completely reliant on the voice coming out of the speaker in your living room. And that technological gap is what made the broadcast so incredibly powerful and panic-inducing. So the crucial point is, Section 5, the lasting media lesson. You know, the most fascinating part of this story isn't even whether America believed aliens had invaded for a few hours. It's what happened afterward. The aftermath was massive. The broadcast instantly became a national media event. Almost overnight, the program's creators became famous, and the broadcast itself became a foundational part of American pop culture.
But more importantly, it demonstrated something that would become increasingly critical throughout the 20th century and beyond. Listen to this thought. People don't just react to information, they react to how that information is presented. The producers of the show didn't change the facts of H.G. Wells' book, they changed the format. By packaging fiction in the trusted, urgent format of breaking news, they totally bypassed people's critical thinking. The most frightening thing that night wasn't the aliens. There were no Martian armies, no spacecraft, no destruction of New York. The real terror was discovering how easily a believable story could become reality in people's minds simply through the power of presentation.
Which leads us with a highly critical thought to end this explainer on. Decades later, with all our modern technology, this lesson in media literacy is actually more relevant than it has ever been. Think about the media you consume every single day. If a fictional story could sound so much like reality back in 1938 just by mimicking a news bulletin, how easily could a beautifully presented, believable story trick us today? It's definitely something we should all be asking ourselves the next time a piece of breaking news makes us want to panic. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer. Keep asking questions, and I'll see you next time.